Someone asked you how you were doing this week, and you said fine, and the word came out of your mouth the way it always does. Automatic, reflexive, quick enough that the other person would not ask a follow-up, and for a half second after you said it, you felt something you could not name. Not guilt exactly, closer to exhaustion. The exhaustion of maintaining a lie that you did not choose but cannot stop telling because the alternative, saying I am not fine, I am drowning, I do not know how much longer I can do this, requires a vulnerability that the world does not reward and a conversation that nobody around you seems ready to have. 63% of Americans rated the economy as bad in the latest CBS News poll. Consumer sentiment hit the lowest level in 46 years of tracking. Biden's former top White House economist told Axios on the record, "Take it from me, never try to tell the American people they are better off than they think they are." Whirlpool reported a recession-level collapse in appliance demand. McDonald's CEO warned that gas prices are pressuring his customers' pocketbooks. The Dallas Fed documented that the top 20% now account for a record 57% of all consumer spending, while the bottom 80% struggled to make ends meet. And MSNBC ran a headline 1 month ago that said what nobody on the financial channels would say. It said, for many Americans, the recession is already here. The economy is not fine. You know it. The corporations know it. The Federal Reserve knows it. The former White House economist said it on the record. And the 63% who rated the economy as bad are not pessimists. They are the most accurate economists in the country because they are measuring the economy the only way that matters, with their own lives. Consumer sentiment just hit the lowest level ever recorded in 46 years of data. 63% of Americans rated the economy as bad, and Biden's former top economist said the quiet part out loud on the record. Axios published a headline in April 2026 that said everything you need to know about where this country is. The headline was 3 words: Americans hate the 2026 economy. Not dislike, not are concerned about, hate. And the data behind that headline is the most damning indictment of the American economic system that has been published in the modern era. The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Survey, which has been consistently tracking American economic attitudes since 1978, hit its lowest preliminary reading in the entire 46-year history of the data, in April 2026, the lowest ever. Lower than the 2008 financial crisis when the banking system collapsed and 8.7 million jobs disappeared in 18 months. Lower than March 2020 when COVID shut down the economy and 22 million people lost their jobs in 4 weeks. Lower than the peak of the Biden-era inflation in June 2022 when gas hit $5 a gallon for the first time. The American consumer has never, in nearly half a century of measurement, felt worse about the economy than they do right now. And a CBS News poll released the same week found that 63% of Americans rated the current economy as bad, not mediocre, not mixed, bad, and 65% disapproved of the president's handling of the economy. And here is the detail that separates this moment from every previous sentiment low. In every prior downturn, the sentiment number matched the official economic data. In 2008, sentiment crashed because GDP was contracting, unemployment was surging, and banks were failing. The data and the feeling aligned. In 2020, sentiment crashed because the economy was literally shut down. Again, alignment. But in 2026, the official data says the economy is fine. GDP is growing. Unemployment is 4.3%. The stock market is near record highs. Consumer spending is up. And 63% of the country says the economy is bad. The data and the feeling are in direct conflict. And the question that should be asked is not why do Americans feel so bad when the economy is doing so well. The question that should be asked is why does the data say the economy is well when 63% of Americans say it is bad? Because either the data is wrong or the people are wrong. And the people are not wrong. They are the economy. They are the ones buying the groceries and filling the gas tanks and paying the credit card bills and opening the insurance renewals and sitting at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. doing math that does not work. And Jared Bernstein, who served as President Biden's top White House economist, the most senior economic advisor in the previous administration, told Axios on the record the sentence that should be carved into the wall of every economics department in the country. He said, "Take it from me. Never try to tell the American people they are better off than they think they are." That is the former chief economist of the United States government, admitting that the gap between the official economic narrative and the lived experience of the American people is real, and that the narrative, not the people, is the problem. And CNBC reported 1 month ago that Whirlpool, one of the largest appliance manufacturers in the world, told investors it experienced a recession-level decline in appliance demand due to cratering consumer confidence. Recession-level. That is a Fortune 500 company using the word recession to describe what is happening to its sales in an economy that the government insists is growing. And McDonald's CEO Chris Kempczynski warned analysts that customer spending could take a hit as rising gas prices pressure pocketbooks. McDonald's is a bellwether for the lower-income consumer. When McDonald's says its customers are pulling back, the bottom half of the economy is in distress. And the financial content analysis from March documented that retail sales dipped 0.2% in January and were flat at 0.0% in February. Flat, zero growth. In the metric that most directly measures what American consumers are actually doing with their money, and the S&P 500 corrected 7.3% in the final weeks of March, as investors priced in the risk that the sentiment collapse would translate into an actual recession. The pretending is over. The consumer knows. The corporations know. The former White House economist knows. The only people still pretending are the ones reading the GDP number on television, without telling you what is underneath it. There are two American economies, and you do not live in the one they show you on television, because the top 20% of earners now account for a record 57% of all consumer spending, and their economy is the only one being measured. The Dallas Federal Reserve published research documenting that through the first half of 2025, the top 20% of earners accounted for a record-breaking 57% of all consumer spending. 57%. 1 in 5 Americans is responsible for more than half of everything that is bought and sold in this country. And KPMG's January 2026 Economic Compass confirmed the finding and added a detail that should have stopped every financial commentator in their tracks. They wrote that the bottom 80% struggled to make ends meet. Struggled, 80% of the country, 4 out of 5 Americans. And the concern about both inflation and the labor market moved up in tandem for the first time since the 1970s. The 1970s, the decade of stagflation, the decade of gas lines and malaise, and the erosion of the American middle class. And we are seeing the same dual concern, the same simultaneous fear of rising prices and rising unemployment for the first time in over 50 years. And MSNBC published an analysis on May 12, 1 month ago, with a headline that named the fracture directly. The headline said, "For many Americans, the recession is already here." And the first line of the piece said by the textbook definition, there is no recession because GDP is growing and the stock market is up. But there is not one American economy right now. There are two economies, operating in the same country, under the same flag, with the same currency, but producing completely different experiences for the people inside them. Economy 1 is the economy of the top 20%. Their stock portfolios are at record highs. Their home equity is at record highs. Their wages have outpaced inflation. Their spending is up 58% over 4 years. Their AI investments are generating paper wealth that feeds back into consumption through the wealth effect that Stanford's SIEPR documented is adding $100 billion to GDP. They are eating at restaurants, renovating kitchens, buying Tesla Model Ys, and flying business class. And their spending is the spending that the GDP number measures. Their activity is the activity that the headline captures. Their economy is the economy the president talks about when he says the economy is strong. Economy 2 is the economy of the bottom 80%. Their wages have barely kept pace with inflation. The Wall Street Journal documented that the bottom 80% spent 25% more over 4 years, but prices rose 21%, leaving a real gain of 4%, 1% per year. Their credit card debt is at $1.252 trillion at 23.79% APR. Their savings rate has fallen from 6.2% to 4.0%. Their food bank usage is at record levels. Their consumer sentiment is at the lowest level in 46 years of tracking. 45% of their households cannot make ends meet according to Brookings. They are choosing between gas and groceries, between medication and rent, between cooling their homes and feeding their children. And their spending, the spending that is being funded by credit card debt and desperation rather than prosperity, is being averaged with the spending of the top 20%, and the resulting number is called GDP growth. And the television anchor reads that number and says the economy grew 1.6% and moves on to the next story. And you, sitting in Economy 2, hear that number and feel gaslit because your economy did not grow. Your economy contracted. Your purchasing power shrank. Your debt grew. Your bills increased. Your savings disappeared. And the only reason the headline says growth is because the people in Economy 1 spent enough to offset your decline. And Newsweek confirmed in March 2026 that KPMG documented the second worst year for job gains since the global financial crisis in 2009, and that employment was expected to be revised even lower. Healthcare, which had been a mainstay of American job creation, lost 28,000 jobs. Small business optimism hit its lowest level since 2020. Housing had already slipped into its own recession. And Stanford Cespear called it a strange time for the economy, acknowledging solid headline growth alongside a deteriorating budget trajectory, consumer anxiety, and concerns about an AI bubble. Strange is a polite word for fraudulent, because an economy that is growing for 20% of the people and contracting for 80% of the people is not a growing economy. It is a country with a growing elite and a shrinking majority being told they are in the same boat when they are not even in the same ocean. The job market they are showing you on television is a mirage built on part-time work, gig jobs, and a government that has literally admitted it cannot collect the data accurately enough for the Federal Reserve to make decisions. KPMG published its January 2026 Economic Compass, and inside it was a sentence that should have ended the conversation about the strength of the American labor market permanently. They wrote that employment slowed to the weakest pace since 2020 and that it was the second worst year for job gains since the global financial crisis in 2009. Second worst since 2009. Since the crisis that nearly collapsed the global banking system, and they expected the numbers to be revised even lower. And Newsweek confirmed in March 2026 that manufacturing continued to shed payrolls, which has been happening for years, but then added a detail that stunned labor economists. Healthcare, previously considered a mainstay of American job creation, lost 28,000 jobs. Healthcare, the sector that was supposed to be recession-proof because people always need doctors and nurses and therapists and aides. 28,000 jobs gone. And the Federal Reserve's Small Business Credit Survey found that the share of small businesses anticipating revenue growth dropped to its lowest level since 2020. Employment growth expectations sank to multi-year lows. The businesses that create 2/3 of all new jobs in America are telling the Federal Reserve directly that they are not hiring. And Stanford's SIEPAR described the labor market as being in a low-hire, low-fire pattern. That phrase sounds neutral. It is not. Low-hire, low-fire means companies are not laying off workers in large numbers, which keeps the unemployment rate at 4.3%. But they are also not hiring, which means if you lose your job right now, finding a new one takes longer, pays less, and comes with fewer benefits than the one you lost. The labor market is frozen. It is not creating opportunity, it is maintaining the appearance of stability by not firing people while simultaneously refusing to bring new ones in, and the quality of the jobs that do exist has been deteriorating for years. The Bureau of Labor Statistics counts a job as a job regardless of whether it pays a living wage, offers benefits, provides stability, or requires the worker to hold 2 other jobs to survive. A person driving DoorDash at midnight after a 12-hour nursing shift is counted as employed twice. A person working 15 hours a week at a gas station after losing a $60,000 manufacturing job is counted with the same weight as the person who replaced them at the manufacturing plant is not counted because the plant closed, and the gig economy, which absorbs 70 million Americans in some capacity, is not creating employment in any meaningful sense. It is creating income-generating activity that has no benefits, no stability, no sick leave, no retirement contribution, and no protection against the algorithmic decisions of a platform that can deactivate your account and eliminate your livelihood with a single automated email. And then the BLS itself admitted in its own publications that the government shutdown prevented the collection of important economic data that Federal Reserve policymakers use to make their decisions, raising the risk of a policy miscue and potential downturn. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the agency whose sole purpose is to measure the American labor market, told the public that it could not measure the labor market accurately. And the Federal Reserve, which sets interest rates based on that data, was making decisions based on incomplete information. And the unemployment rate that the television anchor reads every month, the 4.3% number that is supposed to tell you the economy is healthy, is being produced by an agency that admitted it could not collect the data it needed. And U6, the broader measure that includes discouraged workers and involuntary part-timers, is running at 7.8 to 8.1%, nearly double the headline, and the labor force participation rate has never fully recovered from the pandemic, sitting at approximately 62.5 to 62.7%, which means millions of Americans who left the workforce have never returned. They are not counted as unemployed. They are not counted at all. The job market is not strong. The job market is a photograph of a building that is collapsing, but the camera was held at an angle that makes it look like it is still standing, and 63% of Americans can see the angle. They just cannot get anyone on television to admit it. The United States government is $39 trillion in debt, paying $1 trillion a year in interest, spending $1 billion a day on a war it cannot afford, and there is no scenario under current policy where any of those numbers get better. Kurt Long, the chief economist at America's credit unions, told Newsweek in January 2026 that one of the few places in the economy we can speak about definitively is housing, and the picture there is not good. And then he pointed to long-term sales declines and sluggish construction in concluding that the housing sector had already slipped into its own recession. Already. Before the Iran war, before the oil surge, before the summer heat wave, before any of the acute crises that are layering on top of the structural ones, housing was already in a recession. And the reason housing is in a recession connects directly to the single largest structural threat facing the American economy, which is the cost of the government itself. The national debt has reached $39 trillion. The interest payments on that debt exceeded $1 trillion in fiscal year 2025, for the first time in American history. That means the United States government is now paying more to service its past borrowing than it spends on national defense. More than the entire military budget. And the Congressional Budget Office projects the debt rising to $50 trillion within a decade under current policy. And the debt-to-GDP ratio has exceeded 120%, well past the 90% threshold that economists historically consider the danger zone. And the reason housing is connected to this debt is that housing depends on interest rates. Interest rates depend on Treasury yields. Treasury yields depend on the bond market's confidence in the U.S. government's ability to repay its debts. And when the debt spirals, yields rise. And when yields rise, mortgage rates rise. And when mortgage rates rise, housing becomes unaffordable. The 6.7% mortgage rate that has locked 80% of homeowners into their current homes is not a random number. It is a direct function of a government that borrows $2 trillion more per year than it collects in revenue, and that is paying $1 trillion in interest on the accumulated borrowing. And now add the Iran war. The conflict that began on February 28, 2026, with Operation Epic Fury, is costing approximately $1 billion per day. That is $365 billion per year, layered on top of an $886 billion base defense budget. And the war is being funded by borrowing, not by new taxes, not by spending cuts, by adding to the $39 trillion. And the war has closed the Strait of Hormuz, which has spiked oil prices, which has raised inflation, which has reduced consumer spending, which has weakened GDP growth, which has reduced tax revenue, which has widened the deficit, which has increased the borrowing, which has increased the interest, which has increased the debt. The war is a fiscal feedback loop that makes every other problem worse. And the dollar's reserve share has fallen to 56.9%, the lowest since 1995. Central banks are buying gold at record pace. BRICS has $25 trillion flowing through CIPS annually. Countries are building financial infrastructure that allows them to trade without touching the dollar. And when the world reduces its demand for dollar-denominated assets, the cost of borrowing for the U.S. government goes up. And when borrowing costs go up, the interest payments go up. And when interest payments go up, there is less money for everything else. Social Security, Medicare, the military, FEMA, food assistance, energy assistance. All of it competes with interest payments for a shrinking pool of available revenue. And the Congressional Budget Office has projected that by 2030, interest payments will exceed the entire defense budget, the entire Medicare budget, and the entire non-defense discretionary budget individually. Interest on past borrowing will be the single largest item in the federal budget, larger than the military, larger than healthcare, larger than everything the government does combined except Social Security. And there is no scenario under current policy where any of these numbers improve. No candidate is running on cutting $2 trillion from the budget. No party is proposing the tax increases needed to close the gap. No coalition exists in Congress to make the structural reforms that would put the debt on a sustainable trajectory. The number goes up. Every year, every quarter, every month. And the economy that depends on the government's ability to borrow cheaply to fund deficit spending that props up GDP and to keep interest rates low enough that housing and credit markets function is running out of road. You cannot pretend the economy is fine when the government that underpins it is mathematically insolvent under every projection its own analysts have published. The Iran war has imposed a hidden tax on every American household of approximately $2,800 to $4,500 per year, and you are paying it every time you fill your tank, buy groceries, or turn on your air conditioning. Nobody sent you a bill. Nobody told you what it costs. Nobody put a line item on your pay stub that says Iran war surcharge, but you are paying it every single day, in every transaction, at every gas station, every grocery store, every pharmacy, every restaurant, every utility bill, and every online order that arrives at your door on a truck that runs on diesel. The Iran war imposed a hidden tax on the American consumer the moment Operation Epic Fury launched on February 28, 2026, and that tax has been compounding ever since. And here is how the math works. Before the war, Brent crude was at $67 per barrel. The national average gas price was $2.96 per gallon. Diesel was approximately $3.50 in most markets. The average American household drives approximately 13,500 miles per year, according to the Federal Highway Administration. At the pre-war gas price of $2.96 and an average fuel economy of 25 miles per gallon, the annual fuel cost was approximately $1,598. At the current national average of $4.55, that same driving costs $2,457. That is an increase of $859 per year in direct fuel costs alone, and that number climbs to $1,300 to $1,700 if gas reaches $6 to $7 this summer. But direct fuel is only the visible part of the tax. The invisible part is everything that moves by truck, and in the United States, that is everything. The American Trucking Association has documented that 72.6% of all freight tonnage in the country moves by truck. Every gallon of milk, every can of soup, every bottle of medicine, every piece of lumber, every appliance, every stitch of clothing. When diesel goes from $3.50 to $6.30, the cost of transporting every one of those items increases. And those increases are passed through the supply chain to you. The USDA's food price model estimates that a sustained 50% increase in diesel prices adds 3 to 6% to retail food costs over a 6 to 12-month period. Since February, diesel has increased approximately 80% in some markets, and the food price impact has not fully arrived yet because of the supply chain lag we discussed in other videos. When it does arrive in September and October, the grocery bill increase for the average household will be approximately $600 to $1,200 per year. Then there is electricity. 43% of American electricity comes from natural gas. Natural gas prices have surged as the broader energy complex responds to the Hormuz closure. The EIA projects average residential electricity costs to increase 8 to 15% in 2026 relative to 2025. For the average household spending $2,000 per year on electricity, that is $160 to $300 more. For households in the South and Southwest running air conditioning through the summer, the increase could be $400 to $600. And insurance is connected because reinsurers price their models based on construction costs, which are driven by materials that are transported by diesel, and on loss expectations, which are influenced by the broader economic environment. The 33.1% increase in homeowners insurance over 5 years is partially attributable to the same energy cost pressures that the war is amplifying. Add it together. Fuel, $859 to $1,700. Groceries, $600 to $1,200. Electricity, $160 to $600. Insurance increase attributable to energy, $200 to $400. Secondary effects on services, dining, shipping, travel, $300 to $600. Total hidden war tax per household, approximately $2,100 to $4,500 per year. That is $175 to $375 per month. Extracted from your budget without a vote, without a bill, without a line item, without anyone on television calling it what it is. A war tax. And unlike a formal tax, this one is regressive. It hits the poorest households the hardest because fuel and food and electricity consume a larger share of lower-income budgets. A family earning $40,000 paying $3,000 more per year is losing 7.5% of their income. A family earning $200,000 paying the same $3,000 is losing 1.5%. The war is redistributing wealth from the bottom to the top, from the consumer to the oil company, from the household to the defense contractor. And you cannot pretend the economy is fine when every household in the country is paying a $2,800 to $4,500 hidden tax that did not exist 4 months ago and that nobody voted for and nobody is being held accountable for. Home ownership, the foundation of the American dream, has become mathematically impossible for the majority of working Americans, and the people who already own are trapped inside a market that cannot move without collapsing. Kurt Long, the chief economist at America's credit unions, looked at the housing data in January 2026 and said the one thing that nobody in real estate wants to say out loud. He said one of the few places in the economy we can speak about definitively is housing, and the picture there is not good. And then he said housing had already slipped into its own recession. Already, in January, before the oil surge, before the summer heat, before the insurance renewals, before any of the acute crises that have layered on top. Housing was already in a recession when the year started, and the numbers behind that recession are not ambiguous. Vitengzade Block published an analysis days ago confirming that the United States is experiencing the worst affordability picture in recorded housing data. Recorded, as in every year that anyone has ever measured it. Redfin confirmed that you need $110,000 in annual household income to afford the typical American home. The median household income is approximately $81,000. That is a $29,000 gap. A gap that cannot be bridged by saving harder, by cutting expenses, by working overtime, or by any financial discipline available to a family earning the median wage. The house is simply out of reach. And it is not out of reach because houses are scarce. It is out of reach because the interest rate that determines the monthly payment has made the same physical house cost $908 per month more than it would have cost at 2021 rates. JP Morgan estimated the current housing shortage at 2.8 million units. The NAHB estimated 1.2 million, with 300,000 unfilled construction jobs preventing the industry from building fast enough to close the gap. And existing home sales have plummeted because 80% of homeowners are locked into mortgage rates below 6% and refuse to sell because selling means giving up the one financial advantage they still have. And the first-time buyer, the 28-year-old couple who did everything they were told, got the degrees, got the jobs, saved the down payment, is standing in front of a market that has priced them out structurally, not temporarily. Structurally. Because even if prices fall 10 or 15%, the monthly payment at 6.7% interest remains higher than the monthly payment at the peak price with a 3% rate. The rate is the prison, and the rate is set by the bond market, which is set by Treasury yields, which are set by the national debt, which is $39 trillion and growing. There is no policy lever that brings mortgage rates back to 3% without either crashing the economy or triggering a currency crisis. The affordable mortgage is gone, and it is not coming back. And here is the part that will make homeowners and renters equally uncomfortable. Homeowners are trapped in homes they cannot sell without losing their rate. Their equity is theoretical because they cannot access it without refinancing at a higher rate or selling into a market with no buyers. And renters are trapped in a rental market where the landlord's insurance increase and property tax increase and maintenance increase all get passed through as a rent increase at the next lease renewal. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies documented that 22.4 million renter households are cost-burdened, meaning they spend more than 30% of their income on housing, and 19.7 million homeowner households are cost-burdened as well. That is 42.1 million households. Over 100 million Americans, living in homes they cannot afford whether they rent or own. In the richest country on earth, in an economy that GDP says is growing, you cannot pretend the economy is fine when 100 million people cannot afford the roof over their head and the other 200 million are one insurance renewal or one rate increase away from joining them. Small businesses are dying at the fastest rate since the pandemic, while the corporations that replace them are posting record profits, and nobody sees the contradiction because the GDP number counts both the death and the profit as growth. The Federal Reserve's Small Business Credit Survey found that the share of small businesses anticipating revenue growth dropped to its lowest level since 2020. Employment growth expectations sank to multi-year lows, and the optimism that briefly surged after the 2024 election has evaporated as tariffs, energy costs, and the Iran war's inflationary impact have turned the operating environment from challenging to hostile. And here is what most people do not understand about the small business economy. Small businesses, defined as firms with fewer than 500 employees, account for 99.9% of all businesses in the United States. They employ roughly 46% of the private workforce. They create 2/3 of all net new jobs. They are the economy for the majority of Americans who do not work for a Fortune 500 company. The restaurant on the corner, the plumber who fixes your pipes, the daycare center that watches your kids, the mechanic who keeps your car running, the landscaper, the electrician, the bakery, the barber shop, the accounting firm with 3 employees, the IT consultant who left a corporate job to start something of their own. Those are the businesses that are dying, and the way they die is not dramatic. They do not make the news. There is no bankruptcy filing that trends on social media. There is a closed sign that appears on a door one Tuesday morning, a voicemail that goes unreturned, a Yelp page that stops updating, a Google listing that changes to permanently closed. And nobody outside the immediate neighborhood notices because the death of a small business is a local event that does not register in any national metric until the cumulative weight of thousands of closures shows up in aggregate employment data months later. And the thing that is killing them in 2026 is the convergence of every cost increase hitting simultaneously. Diesel at $6.30 means their delivery costs have doubled. Insurance premiums up 33% means their overhead increased by thousands. Credit card processing fees mean they are paying 2 to 3% on every transaction at a time when their margins are 5 to 8%. Rent increases because the commercial landlord's property tax and insurance went up. Labor costs because the workers they need are demanding higher wages to cover their own cost of living increases. And the customers who used to come every week are coming every other week because the customers are cutting back too. And the small business owner, who in many cases took out a personal loan or a home equity line or maxed out credit cards to keep the business alive through the pandemic, is now carrying debt at 8 to 12% interest on the business line and 23.79% on the personal cards. And the revenue is flat or declining. And the costs are climbing every month. And one day the math stops working and the door closes, and the GDP number does not register that closure as a negative. Because the customers who used to go to that restaurant now go to McDonald's. And McDonald's revenue goes up, and the GDP counts the revenue at McDonald's the same way it counted the revenue at the restaurant. The economic activity shifted from a local business that kept profits in the community to a corporation that sends profits to shareholders. And the GDP says growth, and the community says loss. And nobody reconciles the difference because the metric was not designed to measure what the community lost. It was designed to measure what was spent, and spending at McDonald's is the same dollar as spending at the restaurant on the corner. But the restaurant employed your neighbor. McDonald's employs a teenager at minimum wage. The restaurant bought its produce from a local farm. McDonald's buys from a national supply chain. The restaurant's profits stayed in your town. McDonald's profits go to Chicago. The economy is fine if you measure spending. The economy is collapsing if you measure what the spending builds. And you cannot pretend it is fine anymore because the closed signs on the doors of the businesses that held your community together are multiplying faster than the corporate logos that are replacing them. The grocery store shelves look full right now, and that is the last piece of the pretending that is about to end, because every input that produces the food on those shelves has become the most expensive in the history of American agriculture. Walk into your grocery store today. The shelves look normal. The produce section has tomatoes and lettuce and bananas and apples. The meat case has chicken and beef and pork. The canned goods aisle is stocked. The bread is there. The milk is there. And if you are using the shelves as your evidence that the economy is fine, you are looking at a photograph of a system that was stocked 6 months ago with costs that no longer exist. Because the food on the shelf today was grown, harvested, processed, and transported during a period when fertilizer costs were high but stable, diesel was expensive but not record-breaking, and the Strait of Hormuz was open. The food that will replace it, the food that is being grown right now in fields across the Midwest and the Central Valley, the food that will arrive on those same shelves in September and October, was planted with the most expensive inputs in the history of American agriculture. And nobody has told you that the price tag on the food you are looking at today is about to change. Russia and Belarus supply approximately 35% of the world's potash and 15% of its nitrogen fertilizer. 3 years of sanctions have kept prices elevated. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for over 100 days, cutting off fertilizer exports from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Oman, and Iran. Brent crude averaged $117 in April and just surged to $97.67 after direct Israel-Iran strikes, keeping diesel at record prices. Chicago diesel hit $6.30 5 days ago. The EIA reported global oil inventories falling 8.5 million barrels per day. And the Ogallala Aquifer, which provides 30% of all irrigation groundwater in the country, is running out according to NASA analysis published 4 days ago. And California's Central Valley Aquifer, which underpins a third of the nation's vegetables and 2/3 of its fruits and nuts, is simultaneously collapsing. And the bird flu has destroyed over 200 million birds since 2022 in the largest animal disease event in American history. Every single input that goes into producing the food you eat, the fertilizer, the fuel, the water, the protein supply, is at its highest cost ever or under its greatest structural stress ever. And that cost has been planted into the ground. It is embedded in the crops that are growing right now. It is baked into the livestock that are being fed right now, and it is working its way through the supply chain at the speed of the harvest, which means it arrives at your store in September. And when it arrives, the grocery bill that has already been painful becomes something else entirely. The USDA's food price models suggest that the fall prices will reflect a 15 to 30% increase over current levels for staple categories, including bread, cereal, dairy, eggs, and meat. And the families that are already stretching every dollar. The 45% of households that Brookings says cannot make ends meet, the 111 million carrying credit card balances, the families making hard choices at the store, buying less, buying cheaper, skipping categories entirely, those families will hit a wall in September that they do not see coming, because the shelves today look fine, and the LDS Church sees it. They just sent 250 trucks carrying 10 million pounds of food to all 50 states. Their storehouses are reporting rising demand. Their bishops are sitting with families every week who are telling them the truth that the GDP number does not capture, and the food banks see it. Feeding America has documented sustained record demand. Food bank visits are at the highest levels ever recorded, and the food bank operators are saying the same thing that the LDS bishops are saying. The need is accelerating, not stabilizing. Accelerating. You can pretend the economy is fine as long as the shelves look full, but the shelves are stocked with the last affordable food. The expensive food is in the ground, and when it arrives, the pretending ends. Not because someone on YouTube told you it would, because the number on the receipt will tell you itself, and it will not be a number you can explain away with a GDP chart or an unemployment rate or a stock market index. It will be a number that makes you stand in the aisle and do the math, and the math will not work. And in that moment, standing in the grocery store with a basket that costs more than your budget allows, the pretending will be over. Not because you chose to stop pretending, because the price would not let you pretend anymore. There will be a specific moment this summer when you personally stop pretending, and it will not be a news story or a YouTube video that does it, but a number that appears in your own life that you cannot explain away. The pretending ends differently for every person. It is never a macro event. It is never a headline. It is never a statistic. It is always personal. It is always a number that belongs to you. For one person, it is the gas pump. They fill their tank the way they have filled it every week for 20 years, and the total is $78, and they stare at the screen because 6 months ago it was $42, and they did not change their car, they did not drive more miles, they did not do anything differently, and the number doubled, and nobody told them it was coming. For another person, it is the grocery receipt. They buy the same items they always buy, the same brand of cereal, the same gallon of milk, the same chicken breasts, the same bag of rice. And the total is $147, and they remember when the same basket was $94, and they stand in the parking lot looking at the receipt, trying to find the item that caused the jump, and there is no single item. Every item went up, every line, by $1 here and $2 there. And the cumulative effect is a receipt that makes their hands feel heavy. For another person, it is the insurance renewal. The envelope arrives in June. They open it at the kitchen table, and the number is $3,800, and it was $200 last year. And they call the company, and the company says rates have increased across the board due to reinsurance costs and claims experience, and the person hangs up and sits with the number and realizes that $1, $600 more per year has to come from somewhere, and there is nowhere left for it to come from. For another person, it is the electric bill. August arrives. The temperature hits 103 for 5 consecutive days. They run the air conditioning because the alternative is heat exhaustion. And the bill arrives in September, and it is $487, and it was $290 last September. And they do not have $487, and the utility company does not care. For another person, it is the credit card statement. They open the app and see the balance has crossed $8,000, even though they have been making the minimum payment every month. And they realize that the $200 they paid last month was consumed almost entirely by interest, and the balance went up because the grocery charges and the gas charges and the pharmacy charges that they put on the card because there was no cash left in the checking account, added more than the $200 removed. They are paying to go deeper into debt. For another person, it is the layoff email. It arrives on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. It says, "We appreciate your contributions and your role has been impacted, and your last day is in 2 weeks. And they sit at their desk, and the first thing they think is not about the career they built, or the projects they led, or the relationships they made, The first thing they think is the mortgage, the $2,100 that is due on the first of the month regardless of whether they have a job. And they calculate how many months of savings they have, and the number is 2, maybe 3. And the pretending ends not with anger but with arithmetic. For another person, it is the medical bill. They went to the emergency room because their child had a 104-degree fever and they did not have a pediatrician who could see them that day. And the bill arrives 6 weeks later, and it is $4,700 for 3 hours in a room where a nurse took vitals and a doctor spent 9 minutes and prescribed Tylenol. And the insurance covered $1,200, and the remaining $3,500 is theirs. And they do not have $3,500, and the hospital will put it on a payment plan at 8% interest. And the credit card is already at $8,000. And the gas is at $5 and climbing. And the rent goes up in September, and the child still gets fevers. For every American who is still pretending the economy is fine, there is a specific number waiting for them this summer. A number that belongs to them. A number that cannot be argued with, rationalized away, or explained by a GDP chart. And when that number arrives, the pretending will be over for that person. Not because they chose to stop, because the number chose for them. And by the end of this summer, the 63% who already say the economy is bad will not be 63% anymore. It will be 75 or 80 or higher, because the numbers are coming for everyone. One receipt at a time. The moment you stop pretending is the moment you start surviving, because the energy you have been spending on denial is the same energy you need to spend on preparation, and you cannot do both at the same time. I want to tell you something that is going to sound strange after everything I have shown you in this video. The end of pretending is not the worst thing that can happen to you. It is the best thing, because pretending is expensive. It costs energy, it costs attention, it costs time. Every day that you spend telling yourself the economy is fine, that the prices will come back down, that the job market will recover, that the housing market will correct, that the government will figure it out, that someone somewhere is going to fix this, is a day you are not spending on the only thing that actually protects your family: preparation. And the two cannot coexist. You cannot simultaneously believe that everything is fine and also build a 90-day food supply. You cannot simultaneously trust that the job market is healthy and also make yourself indispensable at work. You cannot simultaneously assume the government will rescue you and also build a cash reserve and a community network and a skill set that does not depend on the government for anything. Pretending and preparing are mutually exclusive, and the moment you stop pretending is the moment you start building. And building is the answer to everything I have shown you in this video. The consumer sentiment at a 46-year low is not your problem to fix. It is your signal to act. The two economies, one for the top 20% and one for the bottom 80%, is not your problem to fix. It is the landscape you navigate. The job market mirage is not your problem to fix. It is the environment you prepare for. The $39 trillion debt and $1 trillion in interest is not your problem to fix. It is the backdrop against which you build a life that does not depend on a government that cannot manage its own finances. The hidden war tax of $2,800 to $4,500 per year is not your problem to fix. It is the cost you reduce by driving less, stocking your pantry at today's prices, and building energy efficiency into your household. The housing trap is not your problem to fix. It is the reality you accept and optimize within. The small business closures are not your problem to fix unless you are the one who keeps yours alive by adapting faster than the costs climb. The grocery price surge is not your problem to fix. It is the wave you get ahead of by building your food buffer. Now, this week, before the September prices arrive. And here is what building looks like. Pay down your highest interest debt. Every dollar freed from a 23.79% credit card is a dollar that was being stolen from your future and is now returned to your present. Build your emergency fund. 90 days of essential expenses in a savings account or in cash at home. That is the buffer between a layoff and a catastrophe. Stock your pantry: rice, beans, canned goods, pasta, peanut butter, cooking oil. Every dollar spent on food at June prices is a dollar that buys more calories than it will at September prices. Fill your tank and keep it above half. Gas at $4.55 today is cheaper than gas in August. Reduce every non-essential drive. Protect your job. Be the person they cannot afford to lose. Learn the tools. Volunteer for the projects. Make yourself essential. Not because the job market is fair, but because in a low-hire, low-fire environment, the last thing you want to be is fireable. Build your skills. Learn to cook from scratch. Learn basic home repair. Learn to grow food. Every skill you acquire is an asset that does not depreciate, cannot be repossessed, and does not require a functioning stock market to retain its value. And know your neighbors. The restaurant on the corner may close, the government program may be cut, the insurance company may leave your state, the stock market may crash, the GDP may go negative. But the person next door is still there, and the person across the street is still there. And the community that you build by showing up, by checking in, by offering help, by accepting help, that community is the safety net that no policy can eliminate and no recession can bankrupt. The economy is not fine. You know it. I know it. 63% of the country knows it. The corporations know it. The former White House economist said it on the record. And the pretending for you ends today. Not with fear, with clarity, with the understanding that the world is not what they told you it was, and the numbers are not what they said they were. And the only person who is going to protect your family is the person reading this sentence right now. You. Start today. Start small. Start where you are. And stop pretending.